Hello and welcome to Send Me. My name's Becky and I'm the founder of an organisation called One by One. Our heart is simple: to stop exploitation going on around the world. I believe that the call and plans of God are over every single one of our lives, whether you're called to world missions, whether you're called to the business place, whether you're called to go and work in politics or Hollywood or raise your children well. Every single one of us has got a plan and purpose over our lives. And so throughout this whole series, I want to champion that in your life. The truth is, when you have a heart like the prophet Isaiah that says, "Here I am, send me," it's going to mean making decisions in our life. Every single one of us make thousands of decisions every day, whether consciously or subconsciously. We're always making decisions. And it's okay in the small stuff like, hey, what we're going to eat for lunch today. But in the big moments, we've got to consult God on our decision-making processes. But so many times we rush on into the day and make decisions made in our own wisdom. Well, today I want to look at someone in Scripture who was a phenomenal man of God. He had a great CV, but he made one decision without consulting God, and it landed him in a lot of trouble where he had to face battles that were never his to fight. Everything started to go wrong. But I want to watch how in that moment God was able to turn it around. So I'm going to look at three areas to do with the life of Joshua. I'm going to look at firstly how it all went so wrong. Secondly, I'm going to look at Joshua's response after he's messed up and made a really bad decision. What does he do then? And finally, I'm going to look at how God responds to the situation, because we can learn a lot from Joshua in this moment. We're going to go through life making decisions, and sometimes we don't always get it right. I don't know about you, but sometimes I've made really dumb decisions and I've thought I was doing the right thing and I thought I was using human wisdom and common sense, but suddenly halfway down the road I realise, I made a mistake here. Well, what do we do in those moments? Is that it? Are we written off? That's it. The plans and purposes are all gone now because you did the wrong thing. Or can God turn it around? Well, I want to look at this scripture from Joshua chapter 9 to see how God is capable of turning even the worst situations around. So in Joshua 9, we see how the surrounding kings are coming against the children of Israel. Joshua has had this amazing moment of leading the children of Israel on into the promised land. But then from that point on, there's battle after battle that he has to fight to take ground, to take over the land. And the surrounding kings didn't like this. And so they were coming against Joshua and the children of Israel. There were many battles that we read about in the book of Joshua. But there's one particular tribe who had a different tactic, and these were the people from Gibeon. They decided to use a different tactic against the children of Israel. They considered that Joshua and all the people of Israel were far stronger than they were. And so they thought they probably won't be able to fight against them. So instead, we're going to trick them into signing a peace treaty with us. And so what they do is they get this team of ambassadors together to go face the children of Israel. And they pretend like they've come from a far, far away place, having heard all about their God. And so they want to come and make peace with the children of Israel and their God. And so they try and fool Joshua and all the tribe into making this peace treaty with them. And sadly, they succeed at the mission. So let's pick it up. I'm going to read from Joshua chapter 9 and verses 12 to verse 16. So they come and they face Joshua. They face all the children of Israel. They've purposely worn things that make it look like they've travelled from a far, far away place in order to convince them to sign this peace treaty. So we're picking up the conversation of them facing the children of Israel here from verse 12 of Joshua 9. "This bread of ours we took hot for our provision from our houses on the day we departed to come to you. But look, it's now dry and mouldy. And these wineskins which we filled were new, and see how they're torn. And these garments that we're wearing and the sandals that we've come have become very old due to the very long journey." Then the men of Israel took some of their provisions, but they did not ask counsel of the Lord. So Joshua made a peace treaty with them and made a covenant with them to let them live, and the rulers of the congregation swore to them. And it happened at the end of 3 days after making the covenant with them that they heard that they were their neighbours who dwelt near them. 3 days. Have you ever made a decision based on what's common sense, on what makes sense to you, given the facts presented to you? See, Joshua looked at the facts in front of him. He saw that their clothes were old. He saw that their wineskins were torn. He saw that their bread was dry and mouldy. And looking at the facts in front of him, it showed that these men had travelled a long, long way. They'd obviously journeyed for several days or maybe even weeks to reach the children of Israel. And therefore, well, they must have travelled from a faraway land. And because they didn't consult God, they didn't ask God for his wisdom and his direction on this. Instead, they looked at the facts in front of them and presumed, well, yes, they must have come from far away, and so we'll enter into a peace treaty with them that we won't kill the people from Gibeon. Ever been there? Ever made a decision based on what makes sense in front of you, the facts in front of you, you've applied common sense to and made a decision based on that? But you fell short because you forgot to seek God's wisdom. You forgot to seek the counsel of God himself to see what direction you should go in. Well, for Joshua, he did this. He entered into an agreement. Now, when you enter into a covenant with someone, this is a huge agreement. You see, their liabilities suddenly become your liabilities. Their weaknesses suddenly become your weaknesses. Joshua has already got so many big battles to fight, having to take the land around him. But all of a sudden now, by entering into a peace treaty with the people from Gibeon, suddenly their battles would become Joshua's battles that day. From the point of signing that contract, coming into covenant with these people, he made an alliance that he should have never made. And sometimes we fall into the same pitfalls. You know, we enter into a covenant because we didn't ask God's counsel first. And for Joshua, it was just 3 days later that he realised what he'd done. He'd realised the problems, that these were actually neighbours. These should have been a land that we were taking over. But now we've just come into a peace treaty with them and we've sworn we will never kill them. What do you do then? What do you do when you've messed up? Is that it? Is it all over? Was it over for Joshua in this moment of, well, Joshua, you had a great CV up until this moment in time. I mean, you've took the baton on from Moses. You've took the people into the promised land. They're now taking ground, fighting for this land. And God's given you great land and great wealth and great leadership. And wow, Joshua's CV up until this moment was flawless. And then suddenly he makes a really wrong choice. Ever been there? Ever made one decision and it's had such consequences on your life that you're just watching things spiral and you're thinking, what on earth do I do? Maybe you married someone and only after getting married did you realise that they'd got an addiction to gambling or they'd got a problem with pornography. Maybe you signed a contract with your business and you fell short to read the small print and you didn't realise you were actually being fooled and stolen from. Or maybe you signed up for a finance agreement and you didn't realise it was a pyramid scheme. And you've not read the small print. You entered into a treaty under false pretences. Well, what do you do then? What do you do when you've entered into a covenant, entered into agreement? What do you do? Well, Joshua decided to honour his word. You know, Joshua honoured what God honours, and God honours covenant. And Joshua honoured that. Yes, he made a mistake. He made a decision without praying about it. He rushed into a situation. I think if we're all honest, we can all admit that from time to time we've fell into that trap too, where we've rushed ahead and made that decision instead of seeking God's wisdom first. If we can learn anything from Joshua, let's learn to pray before we enter into decisions, especially huge decisions like who we're going to enter a covenant with. But then for Joshua, he's rushed ahead, he's gone, he's made the decision already. What then? Well, he decides to be honourable. You see, the truth is, you can't control other people. You can't control how people might try and steal from you, rob from you, manipulate you. You can't control that. But what you can control is your reaction to it. So I want to look with you at Joshua's reaction. In Joshua chapter 10, and verse 6, we read how Joshua responds. It says this, "And the men of Gibeon sent to Joshua at the camp of Gilgal, saying, 'Don't forsake your servants. Come and help us quickly. Save us, help us, for all the kings of the Amorites who dwell in the mountains have gathered against us.'" Joshua's got a choice in this moment. He could have said to himself, okay, well, I entered into a covenant that said I wouldn't kill you. But, well, if other people kill you, well, that's fair game, right? And Joshua could have tried to get out of the contract. You see, the question is, what happens when you entered into a contract under false pretenses? What happens in moments where you were deceived and you went along thinking you were doing the right thing, only for later it to unfold that actually you'd been deceived in a moment? What do you do then? Well, we can learn from Joshua here to be honourable. See, Joshua decided he had to help these people. Suddenly their battles were Joshua's battles, but he was an honourable man. He was a just man. And so Joshua decides to go ahead and help the people. He goes ahead and says, okay, we'll help you. You see, don't follow a bad decision with another wrong choice. Joshua's made a bad decision in this moment and entered into a treaty that he should have never entered into. But instead of following one bad decision with another bad decision of going against what he'd said, breaking away from the covenant, getting a get-out clause out of the treaty, instead he throws himself in. But he turns to God. He says, okay, God, what do I do in this situation? God, come into this. See, the miracle wasn't getting Joshua out of the contract. The miracle wasn't getting Joshua and the children of Israel out of this peace treaty with the people of Gibeon. But it was God showing up right in the middle of it. Integrity is so important to God. If you've lost everything but kept your integrity, then you've kept the truth. Hold on to what's honourable. Hold on to integrity and truth, my friend. Be a person of your word, even when that costs you at time. Don't go look out for the get-out clause. Joshua here in this treaty could have tried to crowd foul and find a loophole in the contract to get out of it. But instead he was an honourable man. He was a just man who stuck to his word even when it cost him. Even when it meant he now had to fight battles that weren't his. These were battles against the Gibeonites. And suddenly now Joshua was pulled in because of a choice he made without praying about it first. Well, for Joshua, I want to look how it turned round. So verse 12 and 13 of Joshua 10 says this. Then Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ajalon. So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, until the people had revenge upon their enemies. Joshua consults God. If there's anything we can learn from Joshua here, it's one, don't rush into decisions being prayerless. Take your decisions to God first and foremost. If you're facing a big decision today, take it before God. Ask for his wisdom. Common sense and facts in front of you may give you one option, but maybe if you consult the Lord, you'll see something else. You'll see the small print that's been hidden from you. If we can learn from Joshua, then please pray before jumping into situations. But if, like Joshua, you've already rushed in, you've made this decision, and now 3 days later you realise they were neighbours all along. Their battles are suddenly now my battles, and I've got a lot going on already. We've all got battles that we face continually, whether it's dealing with our own weaknesses, dealing with our own flaws and failings. We've got enough battles of our own without taking more on through prayerless decisions. But if, like Joshua, you find yourself in a situation today where you've tried to do the right thing in your own wisdom, well, learn from Joshua to invite God into the middle of your mess. You see, the beauty here was not God delivering him out of the contract, but it was God showing up in the middle of Joshua's bad decision. But Joshua learns, he has the humility to come to God and say, God, we need you in this. We need you in this situation. Please help us in this battle that we shouldn't have even ever been fighting. And God does. God shows up. So firstly, we know how it went wrong. Secondly, we know how Joshua responds. Joshua finally, when he realises he's made a bad decision, comes and consults God, comes to God for his wisdom, comes to God for his help and says, okay, I've messed up here, God, can you help me? And number 3, how does God respond? You see, the beauty of God is when we mess up, whenever we come to him with a heart of humility saying, God, I've made a mistake here. I've messed up here. What do I do? Watch how God responds again and again. I don't know about you, but sometimes if your spouse or a friend of yours makes a decision that has an impact on you and they make a bad choice and then suddenly you're facing the detrimental consequences, it can be tempting to sit back and say, oh, so now you want my opinion, do you? Now you're asking for my advice, are you? But the beauty of God is he doesn't respond in that way. God doesn't sulk with Joshua. God doesn't sit aloof and say, well, Joshua, you made your bed, you now lie in it. But instead, God comes in the most miraculous and powerful of ways. He comes in to help the children of Israel. And what happens, we can read it in Joshua chapter 10, verses 13 and 14. So the sun stood still and the moon stopped until the people had revenge upon their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Jasher? That's an ancient book of Israelite poems. So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven and did not hasten to go down for about a whole day. You know, because of this incredible miracle, the sun stood still so that Joshua could defeat the enemies. God literally paused time in order to help the children of Israel. And God comes through in the most amazing and miraculous and powerful of ways. He knows that the people of Israel have been deceived by the Gibeonites. But instead of God saying, well, that's your problem, you didn't ask me first. Instead, God comes in. There's something about humility that attracts the heart of God. And so even if you've messed up, I want to encourage you today, it doesn't mean that you're written off. The plans and purposes of God are not suddenly over in your life. As long as you come back to God with a heart of humility that says, I got it wrong here. God, will you help me? Watch how God will come through. You see, God has the ability not just to turn it around for you, but also for the people around you. The remarkable miracle about what happened here for Joshua was God didn't just turn it around for the children of Israel. Do you know that God turned it around for the Gibeonites as well? The very ones who'd been tricked and deceived them, the fraudsters as it were, God even turned it around for them. You want to know how I know that? Well, let me read this to you. Biblical historians say that the Nephiim or Nethinites were the name given to temple assistants in ancient Jerusalem. Some scholars are of the opinion that the Gibeonites recorded in the book of Joshua were the same temple assistants that served in the temple during the day of the Israelite exile. And they're mentioned in both Ezra and Nehemiah, books that were written years after Joshua. Generations later, the Gibeonites were still serving God. You see, what happened is because Joshua didn't try and get out of the treaty, he knew he couldn't kill the people of Gibeon. And so what he did instead was ask them to be woodcutters and water carriers for the whole tribe of Israel. Talk about decent revenge. And he gets them to serve the children of Israel. And so for years and years later, the Gibeonites are now serving the children of Israel. They're around the tribe of Israel day after day after day, cutting wood, carrying water around the tribe of Israel. And suddenly they got to know the God of the children of Israel. And so that's why years and generations later, when we read in Ezra and Nehemiah, the people who were there from the Gibeonites are still there serving in the temple generations later. Isn't that just the grace and mercy of our Father? That not only does God turn this situation around for Joshua and the children of Israel, but even their supposed enemy, God turns it around that they come to know him too. Isn't that an incredible Saviour? You know, I don't know what decisions you've made in life. Maybe you've made great decisions all your life and you're thinking, oh, I don't know what you're talking about, Becky. My life's great. I always consult God. Or maybe you're thinking, actually, I can relate to Joshua. I've rushed in at times and made a wrong decision. Well, let me encourage you today to bring it to God. Look how God can step in. God made the sun stand still. Now the sun, I'm not clever enough to know this, so I had to research this. But the sun is 864,000 miles in diameter. That's pretty big. And God made it stand still because of one man's prayer. You might sit there and think, well, I can understand that God would do that for someone like Joshua, but me? God wouldn't do it for someone like me, right? Let me tell you, he already has. Do you know that the Son 2,000 years ago came to this earth and he stood and endured a price that was never his to pay. He was beaten, he was mocked, and he was crucified. And on that cross, he could have called 1,000 of angels to come and rescue him. But instead, the Son stood still. God made the Son stand still on behalf of me and on behalf of you. And I don't know what decisions you've made that have led you to this point, but I know this, that when you will bring your heart and your life towards God, you may have made 1,000 bad decisions before, but today you can make a great decision as you give your heart and life to Christ. Or maybe you're already a follower of Jesus and you're watching this thinking, I've messed up in my life. We'll bring every bad decision and every wrong choice to the foot of the cross today, because the Son stood still to take your place and to take my place. He's capable of turning every wrong decision and every bad choice around when we have the humility to invite him even into the middle of our mess. I want to leave you with a video in a moment. And this was a friend of mine who did a spoken word. She speaks so poetically and beautifully, and she talks about the diva. You know, in today's day and age and culture, women celebrate being divas and attitude and all this, that and the other. And she talks about how this diva has a very suddenly different meaning when she's called a woman of dignity. I want you to watch this small clip and see how God can turn a diva into a woman of dignity in the most beautiful and powerful of ways. Watch this.
Back in the day, woman was pegged property of man, slaved to be a baby bearer and straight up housemaid. So then she ranted and raved, got bored and tired of being ignored. So then she came back with a vengeance, a woman scorned. She is commanding and demanding with a deceptive charm, a bad attitude, and her talk is idle, thus her tongue causes harm. And she has a stench of arrogance which rarely does ever leave her. Her main aim in life is to complain, and she calls herself a diva. However, see, there's another type of woman living in this 21st century who is clear about her identity and that the differences between her and a man are not conflicts but complementary. The real diva, the woman who she's meant to be by hereditary. And because it was inherited, it cannot be discredited. On the contrary, it is admired and positively merited. See, this woman knows how to behave. No one needs to tell her how she should be. Two key attributes about her are her strength and her dignity. The authentic diva, with intellect, confident in her ability. She pursues opportunities and infuses yet exudes a natural humility. She has a sincere and unfading beauty. She is neither dominant nor dominated, seldomly is hated nor becomes frustrated. Moreover, her value cannot be negated. She lives her life with noble character. It's not just a passing phase, and yes, this woman has an attitude too, except hers is an attitude of praise, designed for her purpose, and this diva knows it, respects herself, and this woman shows it. And she does not need a man to complete her body, mind, or soul. She's already whole. Classing her body as a temple, this woman cannot be bought. And as she is more precious than ruby, she does not seek after but is sought. And because she doesn't put all her energy into trying to be seductive, she's got more time to put effort into being constructive, cultivating and productive. And compared to a man, see, she realizes her mission is merely in a different position, so she does not resist submission. She has no need to work against the man, instead she shares the vision. As she is not insecure about being the inferior, instead she is aware of the equality in her interior. So here we are, talking about real women who embrace their unique physique, and these divas are meek, though that's not to be mistaken for someone who is weak. I mean, how can she be? She is a life giver, which is another thing to consider, and her faith does not wither. In fact, you cannot recall a time that this woman did not deliver. So yes, she is emotional and does not apologize for it. She is also highly devotional, and those who know her truly adore it. See, this woman can laugh without a worry at the days which are to come. She carries faithful instruction on the tip of her tongue. Her young appreciate her dearly. A good relationship she cherishes. And all these things, they're not what she does, they are a part of who she is. So because she's clothed in strength and dignity, it's not easy to deceive her. And when she walks, it's with purpose and power. And now that is what I call a diva.
The real diva. Wow, I love that. You are clothed with strength and dignity. I don't know what decisions you've made in your past, but I do know this today. When you come and submit it in humility to Jesus, he can turn it around. You are clothed in strength and dignity. I don't know what your past looks like. Maybe you've had times where you've been deceived in your past. Well, today I want to tell you that that doesn't determine your worth, but through Christ Jesus, your worth is you are a child of the King. He loves you. He made the sun stand still on behalf of you. Well, if you want to find out more about the Dignity Project, you saw little clips through the spoken word about the Dignity Project. If you want to find out more about that, then please check out the website onebyone.net, where you can see where we go, what we do, what's in the little pink bag that we're being distributed. You can see all that on the website, so please go and check it out. On there, you can also find out lots of information about what we do. Our heart in One by One is simple. It's to end exploitation of the vulnerable. We do this through restorative care, through educational programs, and through empowering sustainable living. We want to empower the vulnerable to live in sustainable ways. Well, we want to raise up an army of people who cry, "Here I am, send me." And maybe you can join us on a future trip. Really, we want to engage you to put your hands and say, "Okay, here I am. Send me," to be the hands and feet of Jesus, to be a Joshua generation who say, "Okay, we're not perfect, but we're going to go out and take the ground that God has got in store for our lives." I pray that God will fulfill every plan and purpose over your life, so it doesn't matter what decisions you've made in the past. Today, God is capable of showing up even in the middle of your messy situations, even in the middle of bad decisions at times, when you've got a heart of humility and a posture that just says, "Okay, God, here I am, send me. Come into all my decision-making processes. Come into everything that I want to do in and through my life." Watch what God will do. Well, it's been an honour and joy to be with you. Please join me again next week when we look at the Word of God again together. God bless.